It would be profoundly reassuring to most companies to view the recent economic crisis as simply another rough spell that we needed to get through. Unfortunately, though, today's mix of urgency, high stakes, and uncertainty will probably continue as the new normal even after the recession ends. After all, neither entire economies nor individual businesses can erect a firewall against intensifying global competition, energy constraints, climate change, and political instability. In most cases, the immediate crisis merely sets the stage for a sustained or even permanent crisis of serious and unfamiliar challenges. Consider the heart attack that strikes in the middle of the night. EMTs rush the victim to the hospital where expert trauma and surgical teams, executing established procedures because there is little time for creative improvisation, stabilize the patient and then provide new vessels for the heart. The emergency has passed, but a high-stakes, if somewhat less urgent set of challenges remains. Having recovered from the surgery, how does the patient prevent another attack? Having survived, how does he adapt to the uncertainties of a new reality in order to thrive? The crisis is far from over. In other words, crisis leadership has two distinct phases. The first is that emergency phase, when your task is to stabilize the situation and buy time. The second is the adaptive phase, when you tackle the underlying causes of the crisis and build the capacity to thrive in a new reality. In terms of the second phase, let's return to the metaphor of the middle-of-the-night heart attack. In fact, many people do survive heart attacks, but many of those cardiac surgery patients soon resume their old ways. In fact, only about 20% actually give up smoking, change their diet, or get more exercise. And by reducing the sense of urgency, the very success of the initial treatment creates the illusion of a return to normalcy. The medical expert's technical prowess, which solves the immediate problem of survival, inadvertently lets patients off the hook for changing their lives to thrive in the long term. High stakes and uncertainty remain, but the diminished sense of urgency keeps most patients from focusing on the need for adaptation. People who practice what we call adaptive leadership do not make this mistake. Instead of hunkering down, they seize the opportunity of moments like the current one to hit the organization's reset button. And in the process, they change key rules of the game, reshape parts of the organization, and redefine the work people do.
Joining us is Bernie Brown, CEO of The Power of We, as well as a discussion leader for Lascalzo Associates. Thanks for joining us this month, Bernie.
Becky, it's my pleasure.
I read an article last year, Bernie, and it said that, quote, the only thing more difficult than landing your first CFO position is keeping your job, end quote. Well, from your perspective, why is there such a high turnover among corporate financial executives?
Well, Becky, in the corporate financial world, there's a lot of tied into the CEO, CFO kind of relationship. And they are, married in their relationship trying to drive the business organization. And sometimes they can get off track. And when the CEO gets off track, the CEO goes with them. And sometimes that can be very deadly. And sometimes it can be very successful where they're on the same page.
But I read another article last month, Bernie, and according to a recent survey, more CFOs than ever before are becoming CEOs. Are you surprised by this trend?
Becky, actually, I think that CFOs talk the language of business, we talk accounting, so a lot of times we're talking to the investors, to the board of directors, and we speak that same similar language. And that allows us to make the key relationships with people and allows us to build trust and confidence with those people who are investing in the organization.
Well, CFOs, like any corporate executive, are supposed to be forward-thinking. What impact would XYZ decision have on us in 6 months or in 2 years? Well, the fact is many financial executives are trained as accountants, aren't they? That means they may be more accustomed to looking in the rearview mirror, right?
Well, Becky, as the CFO of the organization, you want to look forward and you want to think about how the data from the past helps you predict what's going to go on in the future. You also have to bring your own analytical skills and your own knowledge of the business and your own knowledge of the environment to kind of say, here's where we want to go. Here's where my CEO wants to go. Here's where my VP of sales is telling us the products are going to go. Here's where the operations are going to help us move in a positive direction where we're more technically advanced than our competition and we've got a smarter mousetrap. As the CFO, you're starting to think about resources and saying, okay, how can I get resources for those people now so next year when they show up and they need them, I'll have them. So a lot of my job as the CFO is kind of planning for resource needs in the future. That's how I look at it. Becky, one of the analogies that I've used in different times is when you enter your car, I look out the front, I look out my mirrors, I want to look at my rearview mirror, and I want to make sure I have a really good view before I take off of what my competition is doing behind me or to my right or to my left. Then I plot the course for where we're going in the future.
I certainly like that idea of looking out the windshield, as you suggest, Bernie. Oh, it's the same thing as setting a target, isn't it?
That's correct, Becky. What we want to do is we want to set our forward targets. We want to then take our corporate resources and align them so that we can reach that target. Develop a plan that we're going to execute. Once we start executing that plan, then we want to measure. Measure to see if we're on course, measure to see if we've got off course. Just like you look at your gauges on your car. My tachometer, my gas gauge, my oil gauge. I'm measuring things as I'm going along to make sure I'm staying on course as my car goes forward. And then the last thing I do is I adjust course. Sometimes we get off course. You know, I take the wrong turn, I go this way, now I got to get back on course to kind of hit my ultimate target because that's where I'm going. I'm not going to point A, I'm going to the target.
All right, so let's stick with the car metaphor, if you don't mind. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I'm worried that the car might break down or get a flat tire, and I don't even know where the tire pressure gauge is. Do corporate executives feel the same way?
Well, part of that, back to that resource kind of thing that we talked early on, and we were trying to plan ahead as the CFO, I want to get dollars or resources or money for when that event's going to happen. As a CFO, I'm constantly having to think about the future and saying, well, this could go wrong, I need a little money for that. This could go wrong, I need a resource for that. And we're planning for those before the events happen.
Well, the late Peter Drucker once said that you cannot manage what you do not measure. I suppose that places a premium on reporting systems, especially financial reporting systems, doesn't it?
Absolutely, Becky. In my world, I've learned through my experiences that every item I've ever measured has improved. So I designed systems to try and measure the more critical items, certain balance sheet items, certain cash flow, certain inventory items that we've deployed assets to help us reach our target. We measure them, we measure the utilization of those, and we measure how our people are doing and their efficiencies.
I'm curious, Bernie, what is it that you mean when you distinguish between the data that we analyze and the data that we see?
Yes, Becky. I like to, someone once told me, manage by walking around. Get up from my desk, go out to the plant, go out to the warehouse, go see what's going on in the real operation of what we do. You can see positive people's reactions. Are they happy? Are they friendly? Is it neat? Is it clean? Is it orderly? Are we running an efficient operation? Those things aren't on a piece of paper, but they have a lot to do with how well we succeed at reaching our targets.
Thanks, Bernie. We'll return to your commentary in a minute.
Few business roles have changed as dramatically during the last generation as that of the financial executive in general and the chief financial officer in particular. The classic model with the CFO as the business's chief accountant, who is a technical expert, focused narrowly on the firm's financial statements and capital structure, has been passé for a decade or more. Today's corporate financial executives have become a vital part of the corporation's leadership team and have assumed responsibilities of a breadth and magnitude that oftentimes makes the title Chief Financial Officer slightly antiquated. According to one recent study, quote, leading financial professionals are taking on new roles that add greater value to their business. These executives do not work in a finance silo. Instead, they work with other professionals in, for example, strategy, marketing, operations, and logistics, providing business leadership to and partnership with other corporate executives, end quote.
The notion of a comfort zone is an interesting one, Bernie. After all, many financial executives and accountants in general are comfortable with compliance, with reporting, and with control. Yet corporate responsibilities often transcend the financial elements of decisions, don't they?
Yes, they do. We have as a CFO, I have an obligation to my teammates. I have an obligation to the other stakeholders, the board. I have an obligation to my vendors, to my customers, to my employees. So in a lot of those situations, I'm trying to keep that balanced, that we report to all those stakeholders and we take care of all those stakeholders on a regular basis.
Well, regardless of how you feel about the economy, about society, or about politics, there's no question that the immediate task for many leaders is to ensure the survival of their business. On one hand, you've got to get the most out of every asset that an organization has, its materials, its processes, its people. But on the other hand, you've got to be relentless about attacking waste. That seems like a pretty tall order for most companies and their financial executives, doesn't it?
It is. But if we go back to certain things where we talked about measuring, getting back on track, making sure we're aligned with where we're going, there's probably a half a dozen key critical variables. If you get those listed on a dashboard, you track them and you trend them, and you give yourself a goal, then you can figure out if you're on track, off track, and you make adjustments relatively quick. And from a waste standpoint, there's always a way to trim another 2 or 3% out of every job, every material, every operation that we have. The answer is go talk to the people who do it, because they know how.
Of course, our goal is to attack waste, but for how much longer, Bernie, can our people be expected to do more with less?
In today's environment, Becky, we're constantly having to do more with less. There's constantly a push to increase my efficiency, a push to increase everybody's efficiency as a team. And a lot of times, if we can work on communication, we can find out that the person that we're handing the product to and the person that's handing the product to us, there's a way that we can improve that flow if we just have a conversation between the three of us, between those three departments. And we can cut down time, and time is the biggest variable that we're trying to attack. Once we compress that time, we get a lot of success.
Well, you know our viewers. You know their operations, they transcend countries, borders, and time zones. And increasingly, those conversations are digital conversations. How does that change the task for a financial executive when you're dealing with operations people in one country, salespeople in another country, and your suppliers in a third country and time zone?
Well, we got to go back and we got to break things down to their simplest form. Okay? In our world, we set the targets. We're talking about communicating between each of those resources to try and make our goals happen. So we want to set up some type of structure, and that communication happens. We make sure it stays on course. If it gets off course, we adjust and we move back, and we check in regularly to kind of move things forward. Becky, in today's society, we have a lot more digital access and ability to do that. It helps us with being able to stay home and avoid travel impacts that impact our family life, but nothing beats face-to-face every once in a while. So you got to schedule into your year. There's a certain amount of time. You got to sit across the table. You got to break bread. You got to go out. You got to get to know those people face to face. Kind of make that happen. You can have a lot of your weekly and monthly communications electronically and take advantage of all those. But at least quarterly, you want to be sitting down and saying, let's kind of make sure we're on the same page so we don't get too far off track.
I've only spoken with you today, Bernie, but the fact is, in almost every conversation, there comes a point of conflict. There's something where you and I don't see eye to eye. Well, what happens then?
Becky, in that situation, which is in every relationship, eventually we'll get to conflict. And what I've always done, and done a fairly good job of recently, is I want to listen to the other person. I want to acknowledge what they're telling me. And I actually use the words, Becky, I acknowledge what you're saying. That kind of sits them back and they say, oh, he heard me. Right? Now he heard me. Now I try and focus them back around, okay, here's where we're trying to go, Becky. The greater good of the organization is over here. Now, can you see how we can get you aligned with that greater good and realign your priorities and get your group or your team moving towards our greater good priorities for the whole organization? Usually, Becky, that'll move people in a very positive way. I've told them I understand their situation. I've acknowledged that they have a complaint or a concern, and it's important to them. That's why they've got their dander up or their energy up, and it's messing up with their department or their goals or what's going on there, or their people constraints, resource constraints. We've talked about that many times. They may be in a doing more with less for the last 6 months, and their people are at wit's end. So acknowledge it, back to the greater good, move to the priorities to adjust to help us hit the greater good. Always works.
Well, some of our viewers work at enterprises where there's currently a lot of cash on the balance sheets. On one hand, that's good news when there's a market collapse or an unforeseen opportunity. On the other hand, it may also mean that the return you're realizing is far less than your cost of capital, right?
That's not such a good thing. In my closet economist kind of world, and a lot of CFOs are economists on the side, we have to take and look at how do we protect the organization by having cash in case those emergencies occur and have the cash available to make those acquisitions or take advantage of those deals? Because right now, there's a lot of opportunities. We want to be able to execute on those opportunities and take that buy low, sell high kind of event into play to drive value for our shareholders. But at the same time, you know, if we're sitting over here and have too much cash on, we might want to think about sending money back via dividends or stock buybacks, or different kind of investments to improve our efficiencies back to you're doing more with less. But you want to have a balance of a reasonable amount of cash. Too much cash is no good because it drives down our return. Too little cash is no good because it drives up our risk profile. And over the next 5 to 7 years, I would tend to be a little less risky on some of that and build up my reserves. Or you could build up your borrowing capacity. Sometimes that's an ability where I'm really good at my payment cycles, I'm really good at my relationships, I'm going out of my way to build that up so that if I didn't have cash, I have borrowing capacity. They both kind of play in there, but it takes a little time for me to kind of do that. I can't build a great bank relationship or a great kind of bondholder relationship in 3 months. It takes me years. So I've got to be thinking about that all the time.
Okay, well, that's strictly a financial discussion because it involves cash. But what about a company that has an underperforming call center? The IT folks want to improve the technology it uses. Other people, like those in the HR function, look at it in terms of the people who staff it. And I suppose a lot of our viewers look at it through the lens of cost-benefit. This is a lot like the famous fable of the elephant and the blind men, isn't it?
Well, a little bit. When we're trying to help from a financial seat and get involved in a decision at that point in time, go back to my manage by walking around. There's data there. You can see things. You can find out things. Oftentimes, I get the best results by going and sitting at the lunch table with those people and asking them about what's going on, what's working, and what's not working, and kind of distilling that back down and then going and talking to a couple of the auxiliary people, the IT people, the HR people, and kind of having the same similar questions about what do you think's working, what do you think's not working, how might we make this better? And usually if I can get that conversation to be 3 or 4 or 5 people, the person who's just off to the right, they have the answer. We've got to build into the point where we welcome them into the conversation and tee it up, and man, you get a lot of good positives come out of that.
Well, you're right, Bernie. Everyone loves to plan ahead, but we do live in an era of unprecedented change. How do you know how to respond to events when there's nothing similar in your playbook?
Well, in my playbook, all the jobs and tasks and events that I've had are all different than the last one. Every time. So every one that I come to the table with, it's different. There's circumstances different, there's people different, the balance sheet's slightly different, the borrowing's in a different position, the bank covenants are in a different position, sales are in a different position. So it comes back to a couple of basics. Where are we going? My target. What resources do we have? Can we get them aligned? Can we get a plan going on? And let's start moving in that direction. Let's measure if we get off course, realign, and keep going.
All right, let me ask you another one of those on-one-hand questions. On one hand, it seems as if some people are natural leaders. On the other hand, Bernie, our viewers and their organizations spend a lot of time in coaching and training new leaders, don't they?
Yes, they do. And one of the things that many corporations miss the opportunity to do is kind of move some of their people into, or suggest that some of their people might step out of their corporate role and volunteer. I've found that volunteering at a civic organization, church organization, some type of nonprofit, where I'm trying to lead a group of people to accomplish a challenge and I'm not paying them. That's something that helps us develop our leadership skills beyond anything that we can be trained at, where when we come back in the corporate world, everybody's going to listen to me because I'm paying them to listen to me. So if I can lead a team that's not getting paid by me and accomplish great things, that gives me an opportunity to improve those skills and the people that work for me. So I often try and take advantage of that.
Well, in terms of the people who work for you, I suppose the reality is that you're constantly engaging in succession planning for them and for their positions, right?
As you know, as the CFO, you got to embrace the succession planning thought process, both in your own areas of responsibility, whether you're in charge of IT or HR or accounting or finance, or as an organization. From my standpoint, my job is to make the controller that works for me or the VP of finance that works for me the next CFO. And either they're going to take my chair or they're going to move on to an organization down the street and they're going to take that chair as the CFO. If I'm constantly developing my people, then when the time comes, I'm ready.
Well, I constantly hear financial executives express the wish that their staff could be better business partners and could work more effectively with the leaders of their organization. How do you learn to do that? I mean, is that something that you can somehow develop in people?
Certain leadership skills and certain partnering skills are natural to some people, But for other people, they can be developed. It's absolutely something that can be learned. And I basically start with a couple of key factors. One, let's start with good news. If you kind of start every interaction with good news, you start to learn a little bit about the person across the table from you. Does their kid play soccer? Do they swim? Is their wife into this? Is this? And once you start getting into a personal relationship, then that'll hold you through all the difficult events that'll come up in the future, because that's what we need, is some glue to hold us together in those events. And those personal relationships help move that, because every management team has its ups and downs. Targets don't get hit exactly the way we thought they would.
Well, the other area where people say that they need improvement also has nothing to do with financial expertise or being a better cost accountant. They want to know how to get corporate leaders to listen to them and to pay attention to them. From your perspective, Bernie, how can financial people make sure that their opinions are understood and respected?
Well, Becky, when I was in an organization where we had some events and we were trained about certain, get our message across. And I've lived with those and learned those in that event. And it's a three-pronged approach. I have three messages whenever I go into any presentation. I want you to know this, I want you to know that, I want you to know this. And I make my core presentation around that, and I repeat it, and I repeat it, and I repeat it. Someone once told me it takes 7 times before somebody hears you. So I think about, I've got to say it 7 times. At the beginning of my presentation, I'll give you the high levels, the macro view. I'll dig into each one of those 3 points, and at the end, I'll summarize on my 3 macro points. So I've said it, I've said it, I've said it. That tends to help me get my message across.
Well, you've certainly challenged our viewers today. Tell me, Bernie, what resources are available to them if they want to lead and thrive?
I think 3 things that I would recommend to people is, 1, you need to have some type of continuous reading program, a book a month. I'd always recommend that. 2, I'd recommend they get involved in an organization that's as far afield from where they are. Getting in a financial accounting organization, we know that. Go find something that's HR. Go find something that's engineering. We can always go back to the CPA societies and get all the financial requisites that we need. We need to have a base of our financial groups. We need to have a certain reading program. And we need to seek out other programs that push us to learn and be different. Be the person in the room who's not like anybody else. That's the organization you want to go to, because everyone there will come up and talk to you because you're different and you'll learn the most.
Well, as I expected, you've covered a lot of ground for us this month, Bernie. If our viewers could take one thought away from this presentation, what would you like that to be?
I'd like them to remember the concept of we. Every conversation that we can get that third person involved in, we get a better answer. And I've built an organization based upon that we, and it matters. That third person has the answer that you and I are stuck with, because I'm trying to convince you of my point, you're trying to convince me of your point. The third person is looking at it. Wait, here's the problem from a different perspective. They suggest a simple answer, and we go, oh, wait, that'll work for me. That'll work for you. That'll work for us. That's the thing you need to take away in a leadership position, is look for the third answer.
Well, the power of we's, Bernie Brown. Thanks for bringing us up to date.
Thank you. Becky, I really enjoyed it.
That interview with Bernie Brown concludes the September 2012 edition of Financial Management Network. On behalf of everyone at FMN, thank you for joining us this month. We look forward to bringing you up to date again next month with our October 2012 release.